So now let's welcome our two featured guys this evening, which we're all excited about. Let's welcome Bob Gruen and Lenny Kaye.
Thanks a lot, and welcome to a very strange interview situation, since I don't think I've ever actually asked Bob any questions aside from which way is the bar and is the band any good? We've been friends for, 40 years now, and brothers, and we share all manner of Semitic holidays. And Bob is a great camera eye. He's documented New York for many, many years. The day-to-day or night-to-night life of what happens after hours, and has also created some of the most iconic photographs in rock and roll. And so I'm very pleased to say, yo, Bob, good to see you, brother.
Well, I'm very happy to be here, and thank you, Lenny, for doing this with me.
So for the first question, on February 23rd, 1978, you were just out in the trees, and I just want to know why. Photography moves through the eyes. It's one of the great arts, but it's a very visual art. So I'm curious what attracted you to the sense of the visual, and what your relationship, why you were attracted to the camera as an artistic tool.
Well, I was introduced to photography very early by my mother. My mom's hobby was photography, and actually before I was born, she was developing and printing her own pictures, and she liked doing that. And so when I was like 3 years old, and I was too little to leave running around the house, but too big to go to sleep that early, she brought me in the darkroom with her. And I remember before they even had developing tanks, we used to develop the film in trays, and she taught me how to count the seconds. So I came to photography very early, and I liked it. And I don't know about the visual aspect, what really drew me to it. I mean, I like seeing things. I think show and tell was my favorite subject. I always like to see exciting things and tell people about them. And it's funny that I've been doing so much talking lately in interviews because in my family, they used to try to shut me up all the time because I would always be going on about some exciting story and kind of monopolizing the whole conversation. And so I think it's a combination of the two, is being, that I like to relate stories, and photography is a very good way to express that, to help tell the story.
Were you specifically aiming toward musical photography, or did you just, did you kind of try out different areas, landscapes, for instance, nudes? I mean.
Well, I particularly like nudes, actually. That's my kind of landscape. And I was drawn to that early on in the 50s. I actually liked photography as art pretty early. My inspirations were Man Ray for making art with photography, and Cartier-Bresson, who also was known as an artist, and Ouija, who was always at the right place at the right time, seemed to get the story. And I really liked that aspect of things. And I was drawn to exciting things. I would shoot in school. I would take pictures of the football games. The first picture I had published was a picture of a fire. I know in the middle of the night we had a volunteer fire department. The sirens go off, and all the firemen would go to the station house. I would jump on my bicycle with my camera and run down there and find out the address and run to the fire and take pictures. I just always liked taking pictures of exciting things and trying to capture that.
How did you gravitate toward the music press?
Well, I gravitated. The first concert that I liked was Pete Seeger. That's where I got into music, because there was no music photography when I was growing up. And then I went to the Newport Folk Festival in '64, and I didn't have really any money to even get in for a ticket, and I was kind of on the outside and saw what I could see. But the next year I went back. My mom talked to a friend of hers who had a public relations company, and he wrote a letter saying that I represented them and that I needed a photo pass. And I brought that up there, and they told me no way. But my mom had always told me that no is not an answer to accept, but it could be the beginning of an interesting conversation. So I had a long conversation with them, and they ended up giving me the photo pass. And then I was down front, and I liked that a lot. And so I like music. I like photographing it. I like being down front in shows. And then in high school, I was in the folk music club, and my friends were musicians. And after high school, I lived with a rock and roll band. And partly because my dad had a station wagon, you see, and I could drive the equipment. That's how I got into show business. You know? But while I was there, I was taking pictures, and then when they finally got a deal, they used my pictures, and that's how I met the first record company. And then it just kind of snowballed. One thing led to another, and I just kept meeting more people and taking more pictures.
Describe the kind of music press interaction in the early 70s, because it was a very small but kind of very integrated scene, and
that's true, because I think
everybody was doing a lot of magazines, and it seemed like it was almost journalism at its finest.
Well, a lot of small magazines. I mean, there were no big magazines. There were no national music magazines. Mainstream magazines didn't cover music. But I kind of fall into things. It just one thing leads to another. My ex-wife had a friend. She was in college, and her friend was Ronnie, who was going out with Richard Meltzer. And for Ronnie's birthday, Richard Meltzer threw a party at Nadia's house, my ex-wife. Her parents would go out of town, and Ronnie and Richard would come over and use their bedroom while they were away. And they were away, and Richard threw his party for Ronnie and invited all his friends, and that included, I think, you, Lisa Robinson, Steve Paul. The whole house filled up with all these people I didn't know, but they were all in the music business, like all in the music press, because that's what Richard Meltzer was doing.
That's true. I don't remember exactly when I first met you. I mean, I was pretty new on the music press scene myself.
Yeah, I think it was around then, because I met a lot of people that night, and like the whole rock scene crew was there.
But rock scene hadn't been invented yet.
No.
What was the first magazine you had a picture in? Music magazine.
Music magazine. Wow, I don't remember exactly the first one.
Go. Hit Parader.
But because I was in the first issue of Rock Scene. I actually looked it up. You know, you can find Rock Scene online now. All the issues.
The entire Rock Scene. Is that amazing?
Yeah, it is. It is. It really is. You can see every page. You can see the advertisements for the 3D glasses, and the X-ray glasses, and but you can see the whole thing. So I actually did see that I was in the first issue. So I must have known you guys before that.
Well, I know that there were magazines before then. I know Richard and Lisa edited Go. I just saw some issues of Real Soul, R-E-E-L,
right.
with OJ on the cover. It's kind of like the bottom feeders of these it's almost like tabloid music magazines. And, you would write like 5 or 10 articles for each one under a variety of pseudonyms. I had Raymond Le Fourchette.
Oh, really? Well, I remember Doc Rock.
Dave Salmon, that was a Sam and Dave backwards. But, you would go, it was kind of a free-for-all, but you got in this head where you were just like, it was kind of the next step after 16 magazine. And Rock Scene, of course, was like an early idea. It might have even predated People magazine in the sense that it was mostly party pictures or pictures of people hanging out.
It certainly was before People had any rock and roll in it.
Yeah. I mean, I always thought that was you have kind of 2 or 3 different ways in which you photograph. There's your kind of posed, shots. I've had a few headshots taken of you. You've made me look very beautiful. Thank you. Then there's the kind of performance live shots, but there's also the shots of what I would call backstage, where you see the groups just really hanging out as they are, and you become a part of the group. How did you kind of broker that to become so within a band as opposed to shooting from outside the band?
That's the thing about, looking back into high school, my friends were musicians in the theater group and so on, and I was always kind of drawn to those kind of artistic people, and particularly musicians and the lifestyle. After college, I was supposed to, I didn't even finish college, I did a year or 2, and I was supposed to get a good job. My parents were lawyers, so they considered a job, where you put on a suit and tie and go to an office, but the 9 to 5 thing didn't really suit me because I couldn't do the 9 o'clock part. But working with musicians, I don't think I ever did a photo session before noon. So, the afternoon and evening was more my kind of hours. And you know, like I said, and I lived with this band, and I met other musicians, and that was just kind of what drew me into the scene in general. So it wasn't just you know, visiting at a 3:00 appointment to write a story about somebody. I was there in the club because I wanted to be there, because I wanted to see the bands, I wanted to meet the, you know, the people there, the girls. I wanted to have a drink, and so I was very much a part of the lifestyle. Not like I had to get into it. That was my life.
I mean, you know, I believe you hung out with Elephant's Memory, which provided you entree to John Lennon. You were pretty much the documentarian of the New York Dolls, the Clash. You have the Sex Pistols. You have all these inner things, plus the normal photographs you were taking, you know, of Tina Turner or whatever. But when could you tell when you were in the band's world so much that you were, you know, there's the bass player, the drummer, the photographer, you know, you just hung with them?
Well, I think with the Dolls, I really felt part of the band because I was so integral. I was with them so often and traveling with them, and we felt so comfortable. And it wasn't about showing up to do a photo session. It was going to a party. I had a car, so I would be driving people around all the time. You know, I mean, they needed me as much as I needed them.
It was a great car, wasn't it? Like a 50-some.
With the Dolls, it was a Volkswagen actually in the early '70s. But then I got the '54 Buick Special. That was a good one.
That was a good one.
Yeah. That was a rock and roll car. We could fill it up. It was a big car.
Bench seats. A lost art in cars, yes, I'm sure.
Yes.
I mean, you were literally the Dolls' court photographer, and also by extension, documenting the entire glitter scene as it moved into, you know, what you call the punk scene. I don't know exactly.
Well, it's so funny how one thing leads to another in my life. You mentioned the Elephant's Memory, which is how I met John and Yoko, because Henry Edwards was writing a story about the Elephants, and he was interviewing John and Yoko about the Elephants. So I met John and Yoko first and asked them if I could come to the studio with them because the story was about them with the band, and I got a picture of John and Yoko with the Elephant's Memory. And then as I started to get to know Elephant's Memory, I met their management, and they had the same managers as the New York Dolls.
Oh, wow.
And it was Tony Machine who was working in their office, said, you ought to come down and see this other band we manage. They're playing at the Mercer Arts Center. So I did, and I got along with them. And actually, Toby Mamis, who was the publicist for the Elephants, was the publicist for the Dolls.
Small world.
And I spent, you know, the next 2 years hanging out with them and so on. And when they were breaking up in '75, Malcolm McLaren showed up to sell them some clothes and kind of managed them for a week or two to make sure they played some shows wearing his clothes. And when I went to England a year later, Malcolm was the only phone number I had. I had Ray Coleman, who was the editor of Melody Maker. But Malcolm took me to the club Louise, where I met the Sex Pistols and the Clash and Billy Idol, Susie and the Banshees, Caroline Coon, John Savage, the whole punk scene that was emerging, which I didn't plan. You know, it's just that was the phone number I had. That's where he took me. Those are the people I met.
Well, it's because of the social world that you were in, which is this kind of late night hangout world. How, in the midst of staying up till 5 in the morning, dancing on a random tabletop, how did you get up in the morning and do your work? That's the thing I've always liked.
Well, the nice thing about an artist, you don't have to get up in the morning. You sleep till noon.
Yeah, but
I did go home.
You had to get those pictures out there.
I've been thinking about it, looking through the book and how many pictures I have. I realize I do, in spite of myself, I have a very strong work ethic, which I kind of been thinking about it recently. I think it's because I hate to work. And I'm not done working until the job is done. It's not finished, and I feel I'm still working until it's finished. So I go out of my way to finish it, and then there's always another one, and another one, and it kind of snowballed. And so there was always something to do, and I always had to get it done. Because I was always broke. I didn't get paid until I got it done. You know?
Well, you know, you didn't get paid much then anyway.
I didn't get paid anyway, right?
Was it $5 a picture, if that? How much did you get paid for Rock Scene?
It was about $5. They would pay the printing cost for the thing, and then eventually, when I gave them so many pictures, it was a flat $200 an issue.
Yeah, well, it's
but,
a
it's not
great
about the money.
assemblage of stuff, though. I mean, your book is very thick.
It's a big book. Well, and the thing is, there's about 270 pages, and a lot of the pictures are double pages, so it only added up to about 240 pictures, and that didn't nearly cover it. So luckily the book company let me do some double pages because they like these books to be very formal. But I did 6 double pages, 12 pages in all, that have 45 to 50 pictures on them, to add all these other pictures, all these other stories that I just needed to have part of the story. But it's Rock Scene magazine that gave me a lot of it gave me the reason to take pictures. Because if you're just sitting around in a dressing room and there's some people and they're friends of yours, it doesn't mean that much. It didn't seem like much. But Rock Scene would print the scene. Yeah. So it wasn't just a certain singer on stage and then there's one picture of him in an interview. In Rock Scene, we would have a whole story of day in the life or the band on tour. I could do 3 pages on the Clash. But that meant pictures on the bus, pictures backstage, pictures with Ron Delsner, pictures with the publicist, and get all these other people involved. So when I was in the room with the people, I had this reason to, sometimes I remember driving people somewhere, like, I was with Johnny Thunders or something, and we'd drive up to Max's, and we go inside, and 2 of the B-girls, the Canadian group, were there, and I was like, oh, Johnny talks to the B-girls, Rock Scene moment, And we just created all these Rock Scene moments. A rare portrait, or a pensive moment.
A pensive moment.
I think somebody could just be standing there. I could take a picture, and you would write pensive moment.
It was great. But it's a real documentation of, when I look at Rock Scene now, I'm just amazed because there's people there who hung out on the scene for, a month, and there's their picture. It kind of captures the moment. Which is, you are there hanging out. There's that great series of me and Dee Dee and Andy Paley
the
playing
pinball.
pinball. Just some random night in CBGBs.
Yeah, that happened every night. But one night I photographed it. It looks like fun. Jim Keltner actually told me one night that I'm the witness. That was my job, was to document. But besides that actually came later. That at some point I remember feeling a sense of history, that there was something going on. Because they always say, "Did you know what was going on?" And usually. Basically, we didn't know that was a special period. But there was something that I felt, there was a sense of history. And often I was photographing somebody that nobody knew about or cared about, but I felt that it was part of the history. Some great bands like the Miamis, who wrote 78 #1 hits that were never recorded.
We deliver like 24 hours a day.
Right, Let There Be Pain. But a lot of groups like that I just felt they were part of the history, and that I was making this historic collection. I did have that feeling. I didn't know if anybody would be interested, but I just felt driven to create this history of what was going on.
Along with this kind of almost casual documentation of a scene, you also have incredible live photographs, just iconic, just beautiful capturings of people as they're in performance mode. Did you approach that any different, or you just kind of tried to, grab the moment as it happened?
Well, yeah, grab the moment, but since I'm a fan of rock and roll, I know the moment. Before I was photographing, I was interested in music. When I was photographing, I was interested. A lot of times I would go to see a band because I wanted to see the show. One of the biggest disappointments for me was in the 80s when they started this 3-song limit, and then the photographers have to leave. Yeah. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm not just a photographer. I'm here to see the show, And so I think that has a lot to do with it, because I was aware of where the highlights were. I wasn't just, some guy who would take pictures of a politician in the afternoon and in a car wreck and then a singer. I was at the shows because I wanted to be there, because I was a fan, and I still am.
Oh, that's the way all of the great art takes place. What are some of your favorite photos that, when you kind of run through your photo? I'm sure they're in the book, but what are some of those that you just
the ones
felt
in the
like?
book, that's my 504 favorites. I have a lot of favorites, but certainly the Tina Turner multiple exposure picture, that was a really unusual moment where I actually thought I could do it, and then totally surprised that I got such a good moment that at the end of her show, Tina Turner dances off stage with a strobe light flashing. And I only had a couple frames left. It was the end of the show, and I thought, well, what would happen if I set the camera for 1 second and caught a few of these flashes? And 3 or 4 of them are no good at all, and one of them is just perfect, where it just captures 5 different expressions of Tina. And I like that because it tells the whole story, and you couldn't capture Tina that way in one photo because she does so much more. So that's certainly a favorite. The picture of John Lennon at the Statue of Liberty is one of my favorites because it has such meaning, because I think a lot of people relate to John Lennon the way they, in terms of personal freedom, the way they relate to the Statue of Liberty. And also because I thought of that up in advance. Like most of my photos, I go to some place and I capture what's going on in the best way I can, but it's basically something that's going on. I kind of envy photographers who can think up something and say, well, in 3 months we're going to do a scene that looks exactly like this, and they plan it out and so on. I don't do much planning. I usually just show up and look around the room and figure, okay, here, come against this wall or stand by that, brick thing there or whatever. But in the John Lennon case, I suggested to him, let's go to the Statue of Liberty. I think it'll be a good statement for, the U.S. government was trying to throw him out because he was talking about peace in a time of war, and they felt that was, a danger to the country. But I thought the Statue of Liberty is meant to welcome people, so I suggested to him we go out there, and he agreed with me, and that was a big deal because he's a great artist and understands media. So those are my two favorites, I think.
John, I mean, a lot of the bands, you kind of grew up with them. I'd say the Dolls, when you met the Clash, you're kind of there from when they were just,
I saw like the second or third gig in London. Yeah.
But John was like certainly a major superstar when you met him. How did you guys, he's seen a million photographers. How did you get on the inside with John?
I don't know. We had a similar sense of humor. We got along with each other. They lived around the corner. It was very convenient. But they liked me and they liked my photos. I think partly, they liked the fact that I was coming in with good photos that they could use, but also that they liked my personality, that they enjoyed hanging out with me as much as I enjoyed hanging out with them. I can say that now because I've seen Yoko do an interview recently about me, and she talked about that. Because I kind of wonder about that sometimes myself, how I ended up in all these situations. But it wasn't just luck. I mean, they called me sometimes. They actually wanted to know me. So, it was a combination of good pictures and I got along with them. I didn't get along with everybody, but I got along with some pretty cool people.
Yeah. Beautiful photographs. You've done great photographs of the Sex Pistols and the Clash, and I think they also interacted with you as subject very differently. I'm thinking of the Sex Pistols shot of them with the straws in their ears and kind of acting out, and the Clash are always pretty, stylized and looking cool and set in really interesting. You get their look at each time. Tell me some things about each of the bands.
Well, I think part of that is spending a lot of time there. So, if I just showed up at 3 o'clock and said, okay, we're going to do a posed photo session, I remember one time a photographer for Rolling Stone had a studio set up and they didn't want to even know about it. They came to them and set up the studio backstage, and the Clash didn't want to pose for a picture. But if you're spending time with somebody and you actually get to be friends with them, like with the Sex Pistols, we went to Belgium, and I wasn't asking them to pose for anything, but all of a sudden at one point I realized like all four guys are sitting on the same side of a table next to each other, and I just jumped on the other side of the table and said, hey guys, group picture. And they had enough to drink. They went, oh yeah, okay. And they were like the Marx Brothers. They were always kidding around, so they fell into that pose. It's not something I put on a storyboard 2 months earlier. Nowadays, in order to reproduce that, you need 12 stylists and 4 art directors. But I think a lot of it was just spending enough time with the band, and then when you see all 4 guys together, that's a photo opportunity. And I remember with the Allman Brothers, they notoriously didn't pose for anybody, and I went to take pictures of them for Cream magazine and went to a show one night and then was on their bus the next morning, and they kind of looked around and was like, who's the extra guy on the bus? And they came over and I opened my camera bag to show them some pictures, and there was a bottle of tequila on the top, so we all started drinking the tequila, and I showed them all the pictures, and then eventually they had to stop the bus to get off and take a leak, and as they came walking back up the hill from, taking the leak down, they said, oh, guys, wait a minute, you're all together, let me get a picture. And that's my group shot of the Allman Brothers, So you never know where it comes together, but most of those kind of shots come together from just being there when they all happen to be in the same place next to each other, and they agree to do it.
A lot of times I think bands use your camera as a kind of mirror in which to spiff themselves up. I'm thinking of the Clash, where they really like gave you a sense of attitude and a sense of, you know, stylization when you took their pictures.
Well, one of my favorite times to take a picture is 30 seconds before the band goes on. It's like when, you know, the band's getting ready and they're pretty ready, and then the road manager says, okay, everybody out, the band's got to get ready. And then I go, wait, let's get a group picture. And it's at that moment when the audience is out there clapping and, you know, calling the name of the band, and the band feels like a band, and they're together, and they give this look like we're a band and we're going to go do something. And that, I get that. You can't reproduce that on Saturday afternoon. You know?
Yeah, that's true.
So again, it's being there, being in the right place.
Are there any performers that you wish you could have photographed?
I missed Otis Redding. That was
By
just a little
by a few years.
Yeah, it was a couple of years before my time. I was actually in Macon after he had passed away. That was my big regret, was that I didn't get to meet him. I would have loved to have photographed him. I met Jimi Hendrix once in the West Village. I showed him my Tina Turner picture, and he liked it, and he said, oh, well, meet again, but he was wrong. So I never saw him again. But no, I've photographed quite a few people. There aren't any nowadays that I really feel I have to add to the catalog, you know.
You seem to have a particular affection for the New York Dolls. I mean, you made movies with them. You both all lived in New York. We all ran together. Tell me a little bit about the immortal Johnny and how you know, he looked in your camera eye.
Well, Johnny's kind of like Keith Richards. You can't take a bad picture of him. When he looks good, he looks great. When he looks terrible, he looks good. You know, that was his shtick, you know. He was a surprisingly intelligent guy from the way he looked. You wouldn't expect it. Like, he was always asking me, did you read this book or did you read that book? And I was like, Johnny, I'm too busy to read. When do you read? He goes, well, you sit on the tour bus all day and night. He read a lot. And he was really pretty smart. And you know, aware of things like that.
And David, how would you characterize
Well,
David?
David's an entertainer. He was loads of fun to be with. And so, I don't know, they all became, we shared a similar sense of humor, and you know, that I did with a lot of people, that, you know, cynical New York attitude, Sylvain the same way. Arthur was a little drunk most of the time. He didn't say too much. But certainly with Johnny and Jerry and Sil and David, we spent a lot of time together. And but not just at a show. They would come over to my house, particularly after the band broke up and they had no money. David would come to my house every night. We'd cook a roast beef or a chicken, and they would take home a can of tuna fish for breakfast, you know, for lunch the next day. And I remember at that point, to me, he was the famous New York guy. He was David Johansen. It was like, you know, he was Mr. New York, but he didn't feel that way because the band had broken up, and I knew all the publicists and all the things going on. So a lot of times he would ask, you know, if I could get him into this party, or I would just tell him, like, oh, Queen is playing in the Garden and they're having this party after. Why don't you come with me? And I remember one time he was like, are you sure we can get in? And I took him to this party with Queen, and of course a few minutes later he was sitting on Freddie Mercury's lap, and I took a picture of that, and that ran 3/4 of a page in the NME, and it said, Queen conquers New York. You know, whereas David had been embarrassed to go to the party alone. You know, so it was kind of a mutual, you know, helping each other.
It was great to have these clubs at that time, Max's, CBGBs, where not only musicians played, but they hung out night after night, so you would definitely get some odd groupings together.
Well, that was the thing about CBs that was so fun. At the beginning, it was just musicians. So if Blondie was on stage, the Talking Heads, the Television, the Miamis, you know, Patti Smith group, the other musicians were in the audience. And then the next week, the Talking Heads would be on stage, but everybody had seen them the week before, so you had to wear something new. Oh. And since there were only these few bands and they were evolving every couple of weeks, not even months, it was like 4 or 5 weeks later, you'd see the same band again. Well, they had to have a new song or two. You know, they'd have to write it up. So I think that really drove the bands in kind of a friendly competition to just keep coming up with something better, just to impress each other, impress the girls, you know, to do something new every week. Because it was the same crowd every week, and you wanted to look good. And you know.
How'd you escape some of the pitfalls of staying out till 5 in the morning? It's a kind of strange little path one walks.
I didn't avoid all the pitfalls, but luckily, in the cartoons where they get to the cliff and they just keep walking to the next cliff, somehow I could walk on air back there or something. I don't know what got me through. I really don't. I lost a lot of friends along the way, and there, but for fortunate. I feel very lucky. I try to be as intelligent as I am, but a lot of those things are, quite dangerous. And as intelligent as you are, things catch up to you, and I think I'm very lucky.
I noticed that you're still out there just about every night.
Yes, I am.
Now that you mention
well, you
it.
notice because you're still out there.
Oh, no.
Because I'm a fan, because you're a fan, because it isn't just a job. It's what I do. It's what I like to do. And nowadays I don't go on the road the way I used to. When I was 28, hanging in a bus with 25-year-olds and drinking beer was fun. Now I don't know if I get on that same bus, but I did get on the bus with Green Day. They are a lot of fun. They're not 25, they're 40, but yeah, when a band like that comes along, I still want to do it, and I still have fun doing it.
That's good. Let's play slideshow roulette and see. Who's that? Oh, it's John. We talked about John. Maybe we'll have another one come up that we haven't mentioned. It is... there's Deb.
This is at Max's, actually, one night. It was quite an interesting costume. This picture's been published quite a lot.
We love
shark
Jungle Girls.
Yeah. Well, I remember when Lisa Robinson called me up and said, you have to go take pictures of this band, the Stilettos. They have a lead singer named Debbie Harry. She's absolutely beautiful, and she's going to be big. And she was right. This one, again, Lisa Robinson, she called me up and said, we're going to Pittsburgh with Led Zeppelin. And I said, Pittsburgh, how are we going to get there? She goes, well, it's okay, they got their own plane. Oh. And I thought, a little plane, a couple people fit into it. And we went to the airport, it was this monstrous 727. And I don't know if it was Lisa or Robert, somebody said, get a picture of us in front of our plane. And it took a couple of minutes, I took about 6 shots. It was no big deal, it was a snapshot for them. But it's become the most famous picture of them, because it really sums up that excess of the 70s. This one, Elton John and John Lennon. One night, I just happened to stop by the studio. I knew John was recording. I would, when I had time, I would just stop by often. When I knew they were working, they worked for a month or whatever. So I would stop in a few different times. That day, I walked in and Elton John was there. And I remember John saying, "Elton's here. Where were you? Why weren't you here?" And I said, "Well, you could have called me." But they kind of just expected me to come at those moments, and I did.
Well, people like, good photographs. That's the thing. Has your style changed over the years?
No, actually, it's become a style early on, because I'm not really technically very good in sense of, what you're supposed to do as far as getting the focus right, and I get good composition, but the exposure and the contrast and especially the focus was always kind of a soft focus, because I had to get the moment, and I couldn't take all that time photographers take to focus and set everything right. I just had to get that picture. And fortunately, that's called a style, soft focus.
Has photography changed at all from you in the progression from analog to digital? Do you miss film?
No, I never liked film. I always thought it was messy and very precise, especially the color film. If the exposure was off by just a little bit, it was overexposed or unexposed, it was no good and useless. And it was really hard to shoot enough pictures that a couple of them at least were exposed right, Whereas nowadays with digital, you can just look down, you see if it's right or not, and if it's not, you can adjust it in miraculous ways. You can lighten it up or darken it up. So I never really liked the dark room, the smell of the chemicals, the film. I'm not, the smell of the oil paint. I'm old enough to remember when people were saying that acrylic wasn't really painting; it was plastic. That oil was the only true medium, and now they're saying that film is the only true medium. To me, the media is the message, and I just want to get an image and get the story in the media, and express it to people and try to inspire those people. And inform those people. And so the manner of how it's, how the image is made isn't that important to me. I know a lot of people feel film has a bigger depth of quality and detail, and it does, but so what? I'm more interested in the moment and what it's saying.
Obviously, when you came up as a rock photographer, things were really loose. You know, the pit wasn't so. You know, now there's so much approval or you know, entourages to go to, and would you do it now if you could, or are you know?
Well, I didn't set out to do it back then. I had no job. I just kind of fell into it. People said they'd pay me for a picture, and I was like, yeah, great, let's do that. You know, it beat going to an office. You know, but I don't know. It's hard because people do ask me advice about it. Because now in my lifetime, this career title of rock photography has come up, and they actually teach it in colleges. It's a difficult, low-paying career with a lot of competition, more now than ever since the cameras are so easy to use. I don't know if I'd make the choice to go in and do that with all the competition. And it is so much more difficult with the corporate control of bands, that they want to control the image, the merchandising. I remember it was around '86 when a manager told me that they were making more money on the merchandise than on the ticket sales. That for a $15 ticket, they were making $17 in merchandise. Now multiply that by 10 nowadays, and you have, you know, modern prices. But so I mean, it's a very misguided thing where they try to control that kind of photography, because they were trying to control bootlegging, and bootleggers don't use professional photos. No bootlegger has ever paid me a dime to take a picture, to use a picture. They usually take whatever the manager puts out as publicity, because that's what's free and available, and they make bootlegs out of that. But yeah, it got very controlled nowadays, and they limit the amount of time. The first 3 minutes of a concert is, I'd rather have the last 3 minutes than the first 3 minutes. The first 3 minutes are the most unexciting, when the band hits the stage and they're running all over, back and forth, trying to get everybody's attention. Then like the fifth song, they do the power ballad, and they got everybody there. And then after that, they start doing their theatrical tricks. They come out with the smoke. The lighting effect is really special. By the time the encore comes on, all the bombs are going off, the lights are flashing. I like to get a picture of that. So when they say you can only be here for the first 3 songs and then you have to leave, I'm like, I'm not interested. You know, it doesn't capture the moment. I'd feel I was getting bad pictures. And since I didn't do it just as a job, I had this drive to get good pictures. I don't like the 3-minute or 3-song kind of rules that they have nowadays.
Speaking just from the other aspect of it, sometimes it's really great to get the photographers away so you can concentrate on playing as opposed to how you're looking if the light is
well, that's why they had to do it, because in the early days there weren't that many people interested in shooting rock and roll bands, and if there were 5 or 6 of us out there, the band was thrilled that somebody was going to put them in a magazine. When there was 40 photographers out there, it got to be a pain in the ass. You know, when people, you know, were constantly in your face, and you felt, you know, the musicians felt that they were only posing for photos when there was a whole audience out there that actually paid for them to perform. You know?
I mean, I also think it's a digital camera thing, because there's very little that's more disconcerting. I mean, I don't mind them taking the picture, but when they're looking at it, you know, and adjusting,
reviewing
you
it
know,
right there.
think, oh yeah, right.
That's the Tina Turner one.
That's a beautiful shot. It's a beautiful shot.
You know, people ask me if I could take a picture of them like this, and I always tell them, I'll do what I did and you do what Tina did.
This is great. Obviously, this book is like a monument to the work that you've done over 40 years. Is there anything left for you to do after this, aside from take my picture occasionally?
Well, it could take a few more, yeah. Well, not in terms of documenting what I did. I mean, I still go out all the time. I still add to the collection. There's still musicians coming up that I like Green Day. But as far as my next project, I want to write a biography, because people are always telling me I have so many great stories and they want to hear the stories. But I could do a backstage book. I could do a punk rock book. There's still more picture books for me to do.
Is there any kind of secret Bob Gruen photographic aspirations? You know, do you like go, you know, is there like a little underground stream in you that you don't really publish, you just take for your own bemusement?
Oh, well, I do have a photo diary that I've been doing for more than 20 years now. I had a girlfriend who taught me that when you take the pictures home from the lab, you put them right into a booklet, and then it's in order. And I've been doing that and building it up, so I think about it more consciously now, that I remember where I've been and what I've been doing by this photo diary. So I'm constantly adding to that.
Oh, well,
The Black Glove series.
Oh,
I
what's
could
that?
mention that. I don't know. I got into this about 15 years ago. I noticed a black glove and a lost glove just on the ground, and when you see one glove, something's gone wrong because gloves are always meant to be in pairs. And you see a lost glove, and you know that somebody's going to have that moment of discovering that they lost their glove, and it made me wonder, like, what went wrong that this glove was lost, and it became an obsession, so that now I see gloves, and I'll take one photo where I first see it, and then a close-up, which I call evidence, which is like a close-up picture of the glove itself. There's a mini exhibition of this at the Bowery Electric. They asked me for some non-rock and roll pictures, and I put 4 of my glove pictures up there. And I do. I mean, one time at 8 in the morning, I was taking a picture of a glove on the sidewalk, and somebody came by and said, "Are you Bob Gruen?" I was like, "Who wants to know?" It's a little embarrassing. On the way into a fashion show, Marc Jacobs, we've been waiting outside for an hour, and we're going up the stairs, and there was a glove in the middle of the stairs, and I had to hold back the crowd. Wait a minute, I got to get a picture of this glove. Someday I hope to get Taschen to publish my Black Glove series.
It's the art house thing. Shall we open this up to some questions from the assembled?
Anybody out there?
Anybody have a question?
You're asking pretty good questions, but yes?
I was just going to say, you mentioned about the lack of access nowadays. A lot of those images that you created were because you were given that kind of access, and that's what creates those iconic images. So what do you think is lost in the loss of that access that the groups are forfeiting for that level of control, really?
Well, I would hope that the groups have friends. I mean, nowadays everybody's got a camera in their pocket. So I would hope that the groups had friends that at least one of them was able to take good pictures, because a lot of that kind of intimate access I didn't get on assignment. It wasn't like, Rolling Stone secretary called up and said, Bob was going to be there at 4 o'clock to be intimate. The intimate ones were people that I was friends with, meaning I didn't just see him in the dressing room. I saw him in the afternoon. I saw him, for dinner. We'd go to other shows together. Things friends do together. So, I would think that bands nowadays, if there isn't one person doing that for a lot of bands, that there's a lot of people doing it for one band. I know one band. Also, they don't really have a professional photographer traveling with them very much, because so many more people are doing photography. With the advent of autofocus and auto exposure, it made cameras a lot easier to use. And nowadays, with the digital cameras, where you don't even have to develop the film, that made it much easier. So that so many people who had an interest, but maybe not a strong desire to get technical about it, now they're taking pictures. So I know one group who's the sound man comes along with them on tour, like the guy who does their recording goes along on tour because he takes good pictures. And so he's somebody that they know very well, that they've always worked with, and he can be there all the time with them. They're comfortable with him. Because a lot of times it wasn't like they brought me as a photographer. I came along because I was a friend. And I took pictures, which made it, doubly useful. And sometimes I could get the record company to pay me a couple of bucks for it. I mean, like with The Clash, they wouldn't work with the record company. They were very anti-corporate and anti-company. And but I had met them at Club Louise, and then I met them again because I came back a year later, and I called the record company and just, asked if they could hook me up, and they said, "Oh no, that band doesn't talk to us. We have no contact with them. They won't work with us." And I said, "Well, I really like them, and I want to see them, and I'll buy a ticket on the sidewalk to go in and see them as a fan. Can you just tell me where they are?" And they said they were in Edinburgh, and I went to Edinburgh, and when I walked in the hotel, Mick Jones and Paul Simon happened to be down at the desk complaining about something, and Mick recognized me from the year earlier, and they took me to meet their road manager, and he got me passes, and so it just kind of led to, and then I spent 3 days with them. We got to know each other some more, and when they came to New York, I was one of the few people that they already knew, and I had this big, fabulous car, and we drove around town all the time, and I knew a lot of the doormen because I live here, so things developed like that. But I would think that somebody's doing that, becoming friends with bands today, Yes?
Do you still shoot black and white?
Oh, no. I shot a lot of black and white back then, A, because it was cheaper than color, and B, because most of the magazines only printed black and white. Like you mentioned, People magazine was a black and white magazine. All the magazines, it was in the kind of the mid to late 80s that some magazines started printing color. I think it was in the 90s that people like the New York Times would actually have a color page and then more color pages. And so nowadays, most magazines are in color. So most pictures that magazines buy are in color. So, and digital, it's so easy to shoot in color. And if you want a black and white picture, you push a button, it's black and white. And so, again, it wasn't the aesthetic for me. It was more about the image and capturing the history of the moment. So I'm comfortable with color nowadays because that's what people expect to see.
Yeah, two questions. One is I noticed there's a picture of John and Yoko on 44th Street taken in 1980. Just wondering if you have a particular recollection of that photo. And then secondly, what kind of music do you listen to today? If you have an iPod, what's on?
Well, let me answer that first. That's easy. I listen to Green Day. They rock. And a lot of African music. I like the Putumayo records. Memphis Tamale is a good one. They have Blues Around the World, where it's based on blues, but it's not just the American South. It's kind of an international sound. Don Letts had turned me on to reggae music, actually because of you. He gave me a tape that I was supposed to bring to you. When I first met Don, the first time, he said, "Oh, you're going to see Lenny. Give him this tape." And when I saw Lenny, I said, I got this tape for you, but I have to take it home and copy it first. Because Don had the best reggae songs, and I'm still into the reggae sound. I like the way Keith Richards took the older reggae, the Wingless Angels album. That's one of my favorite records. I started out actually in the 50s. I got into jazz because when I was a teenager, Playboy magazine was writing that jazz was make-out music, and I thought, well, I'll get some of that, But I've lucked out. I found out about Miles Davis and Roland Kirk and Cannibal Adderley and a lot of good jazz music. And then I got into the folk music, and that led into folk rock, which led into, but then I met the New York Dolls. And they were basically doing old blues. They did Sonny Boy Williamson and Bo Diddley, but they rocked it up a lot faster. And then The Clash, and it had the same kind of roots, actually,
And I'm noticing you kind of bypassing the 50s with the Bill Haley.
Well, I like the rock and roll. I mean, the Bill Haley, but I'm not really totally into the classic rock. I went beyond that because I like jazz. I like all kinds of music. I think I'm an ethnomusicologist, which is somebody who likes music from around the world, all kinds of music. And but the first part of the question was. John and Yoko on 44th Street. Yes, that's interesting because that was actually the last picture I took of them. And that was in December 1980, actually 2 days before John passed away. And we had stayed up all night in the studio. We were talking all night, and I remember coming out in the studio because I had taken some pictures the night before. I had just shown up, and I was showing them some pictures that I had taken in September because there was a Village Voice article, and they said, well, the record's getting a lot of play, and we're going to need some more pictures. Why don't you take some more? And so I took some pictures that night, and John said, but I got this new jacket. Will you come back tomorrow night? And I came back the next night, and we stayed up all night waiting, and they were working in the studio, and we walked out. Yoko was kind of tired and said, oh, let's forget about it. Let's do it later. And John said, oh, I got my jacket. He's been staying up all night. So we took those pictures. And ironically, the first night that I met them, when I was taking the pictures with the Elephant's Memory, they were recording in the record plant. And Yoko said to wait till the end of the session, and they weren't going to pose while they were working, but if I waited till the end of the night, and at the end of the night, they did pose for some pictures, and then they started singing, and we took pictures of them singing through the lobby, and actually posing out on the sidewalk in that very same spot on 44th Street in front of the record plant. And so it kind of started and ended in the same place, which is a little ironically weird. Any other questions? Yes?
Hi. Hi, Bob. I'm curious, as a photographer and a music lover who finds transcendence through just being at a show, being one with the music, but also through capturing moments on film or digital, either way. Just sort of how you feel about that. Like, are there times you want to be at a concert without your camera because there's nothing in between you and the experience? Are there times when, you don't have your camera?
I've thought about that, about whether or not, I want to be at a concert without a camera. No. And yes, there were many times when I was at a show and people were cheering, and I wished I could just be one of the dancing fans and not have 50 pounds of cameras and, hundreds of dollars of obligation on my shoulders. That I was working there and everybody else was just having fun. But I have fun taking pictures of vans, and when I go to a show nowadays with no assignment and no intention of publishing any photo, there's a moment during the night, my wife will tell you this, I'll just turn to her and say, I'll be right back, I've got to take a picture. And I'll just slip down to the front or the side or somewhere, and it's just my own need to record what's going on in this music history. And I still do it constantly. But I'm glad that I have a little pocket camera nowadays. I don't have to carry the whole bag. I just have this little Canon here. It does everything.
Right? Yeah.
Have you ever had a really adverse experience with shooting? Like you met someone that really responded negatively to you, or a picture you shot ended up somewhere and someone was really upset about it?
Actually, somebody asked me that earlier, if I had upset anybody. I don't really recall. I mean, there was one time when there was a little confusion because somebody had said I could use a picture for a story, and then when it was used a year later, they said, why did you use that picture? I said, well, you said I could use it, and they were, well, that was for that story, not for this story, So once in a while there's a little confusion like that, but it really doesn't happen often because I'm kind of careful about that. I don't want to embarrass people. I mean, some guys will get a picture of a guy's out with the wrong woman, they'll get the picture, and the next day they'll make $100. I would rather make a lot more money for a lot longer by putting the camera away and not exposing that person and developing a trust so that that person will hire me 10 more times instead of hating me for the rest of their life. There was one person, because I get along with a lot of people, and there really wasn't somebody, I like a challenge, so there wasn't somebody who was like so difficult that, it was really a pain in the ass. Until one guy, finally, there was a guy who showed up, but he was such a pain in the ass, I won't give him the publicity by saying his name, But I remember him. Actually, I'm going to take a picture now just for my little photo diary, if you guys don't mind.
Look good, yeah.
All right, I'm going to get you two here. You're looking good over there. Good. Okay.
Wait, you want me to unbutton another button?
We'll have to get Lynn for that.
Yes.
This is really a comment that I just remembered, but you took a picture of myself and Yoko once, and people always comment on how she looks in that picture, and I realize it's because she's looking at you, right? And her feelings for you are coming through in that photograph. So it's really, I don't know if you want to comment on it at all, but I think one of the things that makes some of your photographs great are that the relationship you do have with those people that you're photographing.
That's what I've been noticing a lot recently since I did this book, and I've been talking about it a lot, and especially the film. Don Letts made a film about me called Rock and Roll Exposed, the photography of Bob Gruen, that was shown on Sky Art TV in England. And Lenny did one of the interviews, and Yoko and Iggy Pop and Alice Cooper. And a number of them mentioned that that it's my personality that is one of the big parts of getting a good shot. And Yoko in particular talks about how a lot of photographers come in and they're very nervous to meet John and Yoko. And that if they're nervous, it makes John and Yoko nervous. And that if the guy's yelling at his assistants and he's angry and nervous, that gets them, angry. And yes, they like me, so they're looking at me in that way of a relaxed and confident and comfortable way. So I do get better pictures from having a relationship with people, and it does show in the photo the way they look at me. In fact, the first time I met John and Yoko, I was aware of that. I remember Henry Edwards had said he was writing the story about the elephant's memory, and would I come and photograph John and Yoko in the hotel, and we got there. And when I met him, he said he had just been up to see John and Yoko, and that they didn't know he was bringing a photographer. And they were a little cranky. They'd just woken up, and they weren't sure they were going to see me. He said, but just relax, wait a little while. They'll see you. They'll like your pictures. You'll probably know them a long time. And I remember him saying that because that's the way it happened. And I just said, well, I'll be in the bar. Get me when you're ready. And he came back 20 minutes later. He said, okay, they're ready. And I remember walking down the hall shaking, like I was so nervous. I was going to meet John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and this was a big deal. And I stopped in the middle of the hallway, and I said, it's not going to work if I'm shaking. And I just took a deep breath, and I said, the only way this is going to work is if I do what I do, and they happen to like it, and I hope they like it, but if they don't, I'm already alive, I'll be fine. And I took a breath, and I relaxed, and I went in, and that is what made it work. Yeah. Yes?
I was going to ask, did anyone ever make you nervous? I mean, you said John and Yoko made you nervous in that instance, but...
Yeah, I mean, there's some people that you just, you've heard so much about that, I've been a little nervous when I meet them. But having met a lot of people, I know that, even Queen Elizabeth goes to the bathroom a couple of times a day. But we're all people and we're all the same, and so, no, there's not really, and I'm fascinated by people, the different personalities and how they react to different situations. I'm kind of a sociologist in that sense, where I study exotic culture. So there's not a lot that gets me nervous nowadays, I don't think, or for a long time. Yes?
I was going to say, as a fellow New Yorker, when I was young, the places I used to go to, some of them aren't there anymore. Like the Palladium in the 90s was a big club, I used to go to a lot, and it's gone now. I was wondering if when you walk past these places like CBGBs that's not there anymore, or Max's is not there anymore, does it make you sad walking through those streets?
I miss it about as much as I miss my high school class. It was a lot of fun.
CBGBs isn't there anymore?
you got to get out more often.
Where was I last night?
You got to get out more often.
Oh my God! Wait, I was in Max's.
But I mean, those things were fun. But I say that high school thing because somebody once asked John Lennon when he was going to get the Beatles back together, and he answered, "When are you going to go back to high school?" CB's was fun, but I was younger, and I think CB's wasn't a place. CB's was a club run by Hilly Crystal, and whatever place he ran would have been like that. It was his imprint that made that place so special. It was the way he was so open to letting the musicians do whatever they wanted to do, and have the freedom to grow and to learn. That made that place so special, and more power to him for not selling out the name at the end to a Garmento who wouldn't have known what to do with it. So I don't miss the spot or the old days. I mean, a lot of those people are dead. I wouldn't want to go back to those places without the people that were there. It's one of the sad parts of being lucky enough to grow older, is that you have these experiences that don't exist anymore. But I have new experiences. I meet young bands and new people all the time. And there's new places. I mean, it's not like CB's closed, Max is closed, but there's pianos, there's living room, and there's 100 clubs out in Brooklyn. The Brooklyn Bowl is a really nice, fun place to go. You can bowl and eat and see a band. Couldn't do that at CBGBs. I definitely wouldn't eat in CBGBs. I'll tell you that. So, things get better if you look at it that way.
Based on your experience, have you ever thought about or picked up a musical instrument? And are you musical in any way?
Well, I'm kind of musical with a camera. Billy Joe said I'm part of the band, but my instrument's the camera. As a kid, they tried to teach me to play the bugle, but I wanted to play Miles Davis, and they wanted me to play John Philip Sousa. So it didn't really get along, and luckily they found out that it was pushing my teeth back, and I had to get orthodontia work so I could give up the bugle, and they gave me drumsticks, and I was supposed to play the drums, which I really don't have that kind of rhythm. And after about 2 years, my mom came to the school orchestra recital, and at the end of the night she said, the band was pretty good, but there was something wrong, and I think it was the rhythm, so you can give up the drums now. And I was very happy to give that up. But I did play the bugle with the Clash, because having played the trumpet, whenever I see a bugle, I tend to just pick it up and blow a few notes. And Paul Simon and I went to his house to get a ride with him to a gig, and he had a bugle sitting on the table, and I picked it up and I played a couple notes, and he was all excited. He said, "You can play the bugle?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "We want somebody to play a cavalry charge to open up the show." And so I was actually in the band for a couple of shows. I played on Broadway at Bonds with the Clash. I mean, for 20 seconds, but 14 nights in a row.
Hi, did you have one over there?
Yeah, hey Bob.
Hi.
Hey, I was leaving accidentally a protest on Wall Street this afternoon as I was running. I saw, the sidewalk vendors have your famous picture, the iconic picture of John, and I often wonder when I see this, how do you feel about that? Are you feel like cool about it because you're like sharing it with people who are coming to this?
Yes, in a sense, I do feel lucky to be able to share John's influence and inspiration with people. I do like to get paid for my pictures. I've always been a very low budget person, but I'm not one of those people who gets like furiously angry and wants to track down every little thief. I mean, just be trying to like kill all the cockroaches in New York, The way I tend to look at it is that bootleggers and thieves can steal anything they want, and the fact that they consistently steal my pictures over and over is quite a compliment, since there's a lot of pictures out there in the world. As far as those particular souvenir pictures, and they sell them all around Central Park. They sell so many of them, I would like to have a cut. They could be fair, maybe share some of that with me. But I have a feeling that the people who do that live out in Brighton Beach, and there's some people that you just don't want to find. Some people you don't want them to think you're looking for them. So yeah, I take it as a compliment, and I would love to get paid for it someday. But they don't pay anybody, so it's not like I'm losing royalties that they're giving somebody else by mistake.
It's not like you're sharing it with like tourists who are coming to America to capture that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
Yeah.
cool. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay.
Not to fixate on John Lennon, but did I understand that you took photos of him in Yonkers? Is that right? No,
Yes, at the Ontomeyers Park.
yeah. Could you recount a little bit of that experience?
That was a beautiful day, actually. I had discovered Ontomeyer Park early on in the 60s. I've been there just a few times, but it's a beautiful place. There was a lawyer named Louis B. Ontomeyer who had an estate overlooking the Hudson River, and he developed it into one of the more beautiful gardens in the Hudson Valley. And I had found out about it. It was kind of in disrepair, and people didn't really know, but they still don't know about it. Although just recently they're starting a renovation of that park. But a magazine, Bravo magazine, a writer for Bravo called me up and asked if they could do an interview with John, and I called him, and he had just kind of reconnected with Yoko, and it was shortly after the Grammys when they had come out in public, and it was basically one of the last interviews he did before kind of going home for 5 years. But he was up for it, and I drove him up to Yonkers, up there to Ontomeyers, and it's a beautiful park. It has English gardens. It has a mosaic with a Medusa's head. It's got a man-made mountain that has a cave in it with a cupola up on top. It's got views overlooking the Hudson with woods and a long staircase. It's quite elaborate, and a lot of different. I've actually done a photo session with the Shirelles up there too one time. But the photo session with John was really nice. We drove up there. He did the whole interview talking to the reporter in the car and all afternoon. He told us that Yoko was pregnant, and he was very excited that he and Yoko were finally going to have a child together. He was sober. He was back from Los Angeles and really kind of leading towards living a healthier life. He was talking about his macrobiotic diet. And we stopped for a cup of coffee in a diner on the way home, and it's one of my favorite pictures of John, where he's just sitting there with his army coat and a cup of coffee with $1 on the counter paying the bill, and I call it the working class hero picture. It was a really nice afternoon, and it's a beautiful park, and it's open most of the time. You can go up there and visit, and now, like I say, they're finally renovating and fixing it up a bit.
Well, Bob, this is your moment. I'm just so happy. I just have one other question. Do you remember those twins? It was,
Yes. The French Polynesian girls.
Yeah. I believe there was something
It helps to
Asiatic,
know-
perhaps.
It helps to know pretty girls like that, because you see, even 30 years later, your friends remember you for things like that.
Yeah.
She was in a nightclub, and Billy Idol came by, and I took a picture of her with Billy Idol, and she came to pick up the pictures, and we became friends.
Well, I just happen to have a negative of some of the later things, and if you'd like to buy it back, I'd be more than happy. Anyway, I'd like
You
to...
know all my secrets.
I'd like to congratulate you, Bob, on your collected works there. It's an incredible testament to hard work and being there and being a part of the scene, and really that's what it's about, to be part of something that continues and happens and gives you great energy, and just leafing through the book and seeing the incredible shots of all our favorite performers and then backstage and on stage. It's a great testament to what you've done in terms of rock photography, and I just want to say I appreciate it, brother.
Well, thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for coming out and seeing him.
Thank you all for coming out, and thank you, Tamar, who's here. You want to just wave a little
Tamar,
bit?
we love you, Tamar.
Tamar is my editor who helped put together this fabulous book, and I have her to thank for it coming out so well, beyond my expectations of doing a collection book. It takes a long time. I kind of work on inspiration and intuition, I think. I just don't do things till it just feels like it's the right time to do it. And this certainly was the right time to do the book, so thank you.
Great. And thank you, everybody. And,
And
Bob will see you at the autograph table.
Yeah, I'll be signing copies of the book over here. We're selling copies. Anybody want to bring one home, come on over, pick one up for gifts. They make great Christmas gifts for your friends.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Or birthday presents.
Hanukkah.
Hanukkah, yeah, whatever.